Hello and welcome to Reportage. This is Danish bin Nabi. In today's segment of Reportage, I am joined by novelist Rohit Manchanda to talk about his recently released novel, The Enclave, which is published by Harper and Collins. More from the author. Mr. Rohit, explain it for the viewers. What is this novel all about?
Right. Thank you, Danish. And first of all, thanks very much for having me on your show. It's a real pleasure to be on it and speak about my novel. Well, this novel is called The Enclave, and what it is about cannot really be summed up in just a few words, but I'll try to say what I had in mind when I was writing this. So it's on the surface of it, it's to do with a woman in her early 40s living out her life in the city of Mumbai. She works in a kind of a government institution, but really the novel is not that much to do with her work life as such. It's to do with that, but also much more to do with her private life and her views on various things. So that's the superficial side of it. But at a, let's say, more uh, profound level, or at a more kind of psychological level, what I've tried to explore here is how someone who is well placed in life, who is enjoying her existence and is comfortable in many ways as well, can actually have things falling apart from themselves uh, because of their own vanity, for instance, their own hubris. So Maya, as a character in the novel, is rather a flawed character. She has fairly high airs about herself, and sometimes tends to look down on others a little bit. Takes tends to take people for granted. Uh, People, whether they're in her workplace or whether they're her lovers, and so forth. And this, of course, can rebound on one if one has this sort of stance on things. And I've also tried to explore in this novel how this sort of comeuppance takes place for Maya, uh, and how she has to then face with an almost a bitter reckoning. So there we are. It's let's say, to sum up, it's about this woman in her early 40s and the way she's going about her life. But at the slightly more intricate level, it's to do with her psychological life and what it entails for her.
The book, this Maya character, talks about the era of 2000s. Why have you
That's right.
chosen, yeah, this era of 2000s? Why not any other
Yes.
90s or 80s back or maybe now? Why 2000s?
Yes, and that's a very interesting point. A fair amount of thought went into it. First of all, of course, I started pondering who should be the protagonist for the sort of novel I had in mind. And then when I circled in on someone like Maya, let's say, and the kind of life world that I wished to portray in the novel, it struck me that around the mid 2000s might be the best time to set the novel in. The city of Mumbai is also a participant in the novel, uh, but there's a different reason for that. But since you asked about the setting in time, I'll just say this much more, that I've depicted Maya as a freewheeling sort of person, very independent minded, very free spirited. Uh, and it was then around the early 2000s and mid 2000s, in my view, that a lot of social and cultural boundaries started to widen up. The constraints that had been there for decades, especially for women, started to widen up, broaden out. There were a few reasons for this, of course. One was economic liberalization that was set afoot in the late 80s and the early 90s. But along with economic liberalization, there also came, almost as an inevitable consequence, a liberalization of social mores. We often see that happening in societies, not always, but quite often, uh, especially when women can also partake of the newfound economic well-being that's there. They have greater independence of action. They can order their lives much more uh, self-willedly. They can self-determination becomes a key point in women's lives and then in the lives of many others. And that kind of thing, I think, reached a summit around the mid 2000s. And Maya, like many other women that I've seen and known, was a direct beneficiary of uh, these much wider social norms, much more liberal social norms that had come into being. And so her very lifestyle is determined by the time that the novel is set in, as would any lifestyle be in any particular novel. And what I felt was that if I wished to depict a woman of this type, of the Maya type, leading a very independent, untrammeled lifestyle, being able to do as she pleases, so much so that it sometimes goes to her head, then maybe the mid 2000s was uh, the right time, perhaps the best time to set the novel in, if that
Basically,
answers your
it
question.
was the time for the country when it started to liberate itself, if I may put it.
Yes, absolutely. I think in many ways, shackles of the past were being thrown off. Again, the process had started earlier, but as I was saying, it reached a kind of a zenith, I think, around the mid 2000s and well into the early 2010s as well, that sort of thing. Uh, so I felt that this would be a time of inflection, a time of rapid change, uh, which many had experienced and which many actually made the most of. They took whatever they could from this period of rapid change and from the kinds of changes that had come underway. Uh, absolutely, that is the key reason that I thought the mid 2000s would be a befitting temporal setting for the novel.
Mr. Rohit, how much time it took you to complete this, The Enclave?
It took me a bit of time. It's always a slightly embarrassing answer to give when one has to give this sort of answer in terms of years. But it's taken me some 5 or 6 years to, from the start, thinking about the character, the chief character, and the other characters in the novel, thinking about how to go about portraying this life world that is being inhabited, how to do it, how to set it, what sort of tone to adopt, what sort of narrative to stitch together. uh, a lot depends also, I think, on if you're wishing to portray a certain kind of life space. It also hinges a lot on the sort of diction you adopt, on the sort of tenor of your writing. So I needed to give a fair bit of thought to all of that, not just to begin with, but as I was proceeding through the novel. Um but I would say that I was also pretty busy at that time with my professional commitments. So I had something like a dozen PhD students working with me in my lab. I had to supervise their theses and master's students and so forth. But all told, it took some 6 or 7 years, and maybe of focused, concentrated time, it might be 2 or 3 years, something like
Yeah,
that.
bit of digression from the novel. The
Hmm.
feminist class, which is, and I'm pretty sure that we men are very afraid of this class. They have always accused us men of suppressing the women. Are they right in their assertions that we always try to suppress the women? Because as Maya in this book, the Maya character, it's again a woman that has been suppressed for a long.
Oh, yes, I'd say that Maya, uh, before she finds her freedom, she's had a pretty constrained existence. But it's that sort of constraint uh, has existed because of social norms. It's not as if she's been actively suppressed by any particular person or persons. But it's because of the way society was, and of course, I've also shown her father in the novel to be the sort of person that exercises authority and sometimes also then exercises suppression just from the very nature of his being and just from the very nature of social norms as they exist at the time. So certainly she's been a prey to that sort of a thing. But I wouldn't say that, to return to the first question that you asked, I wouldn't say that we as men are afraid of feminists as such. If we take feminism as a class of thought, which also it's very difficult to do because there are so many shades of it. And in the novel, I've actually written that Maya doesn't really think of herself as too much of a feminist. So uh, there are shades of gray everywhere. I do believe, yes, on another point that you touched on, I do believe that women historically have been suppressed to a great degree. They have been repressed. Uh, they've been bound, their hands have been tied on many, many fronts. They've not been able to express themselves freely, let alone do what they wish to do, take sort of part in um, e- social evolution, let's say, take part in the kind of social evolution that we see around us to the same degree as men. So certainly they've been left out and marginalized and disenfranchised from a lot of things, and there's bound to be some sort of reaction to that historically, I think.
And that reaction has come in the feminist groups, in form of the feminist groups.
It can come in the form of overtly feminist groups. Yes, I believe so. But of course, it can also come in the form of uh, women, people like Maya, perhaps, who do not subscribe to any particular notion of feminism or any particular description of feminism, but are yet very, very, so to speak, feminist in themselves through their actions. So sometimes one need not subscribe to an ideology, but through one's own lifestyles, one's choices, and one's actions, one can end up being a feminist at heart, let's say.
Mr. Rohit, let me tag you a thing that you are the women advocate, one of the women advocates, because you have written on the character Maya. What are your suggestions for the society at large so that women are, are given the equal chance like the men are? What are the immediate
Oh,
steps which we need to
oh,
take?
all right. Well, the immediate steps are the ones that women have been asking for. In fact, demanding fairly vociferously at times, uh, and which we have somehow not been listening to as much and as attentively as we should. So the first step in the whole process is to listen um to what it is that women are saying, what it is that they feel left out of. Why is it that they feel repressed? Why is it that they feel discriminated against? Very often, um even if one is sensitive, let's say, towards a certain cause, and espouses it, even if one's sensibilities are tuned that way, one may not be able to see things the way that women do. So, as a man, even though I might feel that, yes, very intuitively feel that, yes, equality is important, equity of opportunity is important, and egalitarianism is important, and all that, I may not be able to actually perceive exactly how discriminated against women feel, and exactly what they wish, what steps they wish to be taken place. So it's important to listen to that discourse and then start acting on it as soon as possible, of course, as you say.
But given our society, don't you feel
Mhm.
that caste plays an important role? It
Oh, caste
overshadows everything.
does. Caste does play an important role, and it can be an overarching influence on very many things. But let me put it this way, that even when women are not being discriminated against, let's say, owing to their caste, they are being discriminated against simply because they are women. So it's not as if even in the so-called higher castes, women are not facing the brunt of prejudice. They are. What caste does is to confound everything and compound everything. And so you have the complexities maybe escalating tenfold, um, the intricacies that you need to sort out are getting that much more tangled. So there certainly it becomes a caste becomes something that you need to address very actively together with, let's say, the emancipation of women.
So we need to address the women issues on multiple layers in our society.
Absolutely. There can be
And the
gender
important
issues of,
you raised in
yes.
the previous answer was we must listen to them. Listening is
We
an
have to,
important
yeah.
part which we have till now missed.
We very often miss it because part of the reason that we don't listen is because we don't empathize and we don't wish to empathize. Sometimes one doesn't wish to empathize because one knows that there is let me call it a danger, a peril of some of one's own authority being taken away. So men are very
This,
often in this
this
position.
empathy, this empathy has this empathy to do anything with the male ego.
Oh, yes, certainly. I was actually coming to that, about to come to that. I think the reason, one of the foundational reasons that men uh, prefer not to listen, let's say, and prefer not to be too sensitive to women's issues, is because they fear that some of their authority will be taken away if there is greater egalitarianism. And it stands to reason, of course. In a patriarchal society, men call all the shots, men pull all the strings, uh, and any dilution of that is seen as a bit of a, not a bit of a threat, but a large threat, a peril almost. And that is one reason that men do not wish to even listen to women sometimes. And absolutely, it's tied in with the male ego, isn't it? Because the male ego is all about power, all about authority, all about control. And if you dilute some of that, then that ego is taking a blow. Then that ego stands in danger of being shattered. So one builds silos around it.
So, Mr. Rohit, make me understand, lecture me on this. Which one should be the first step for the males? To let their egos go or to listen to the women first?
The first one that you mentioned is certainly uh, perhaps a precondition to the second one. So it needs to happen first. These things can happen simultaneously as well. I know many men who have had to, in a way, who have been compelled to shed some of their ego when they've met women who are, let's say, sparklingly bright, incredibly intelligent, gifted, and so forth. So the moment one acknowledges that yes, women can do things just as well as men can, and when one sees evidence of it, and that they can very often surpass men in their abilities and in their talent, then one is, if one has even the least bit of sensitivity or intelligence, one's ego will get watered down a little bit in relation to, let's say, women at large. So one has to be open to these sorts of thoughts, and if that dilution of ego happens, then the rest of it becomes a lot easier, certainly.
Mr. Rohit, pleasure talking to me. And I must thank you and appreciate you for this novel. And let me hold this novel once again for the audience, so that it reaches maximum people and more people buy it, read it, and understand the character of Maya in it. Pleasure talking to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on once more, and it's been wonderful to talk about all these subjects.
Please subscribe to our channel Reportage and press the bell icon to remain updated.